Good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you may be, or good evening, or good night. This is Jen at JensArtyInclinations, a place to create, share, and play.
Hello everyone. Today I'm doing some backgrounds. I wanted some fairly simple backgrounds just using my distress inks and a few stamps. So I wanted the distress inks to add some colour to the background. Here I put it onto an acrylic block and then I smudged that across the paper that I'd spritzed with water as well. But I thought, look, that's going to take too long. So the glass mat that I was using, to keep my work surface clean, I thought, I'm just going to use that. So this is just a normal kitchen cutting mat. Oh, it's one that I picked up from the local tip. They have a shop there at the tip, or they used to. And so, it worked fine. Obviously, it makes it a bit hard when it's got a pattern on it to see your inks underneath. But, it also works. And so I feel like that's really important. We don't need all of the fancy schmancy tools. You can often use what you've got. So if you've got a piece of glass, any glass, if you've got a piece of acetate, just a piece of plastic off some packaging, use it. It will still work to splodge your inks. So anyway, I just thought I'd take you on this journey. As I said, I was just doing some background pages. I figure it's a different kind of masterboard when you're colouring up pages or making backgrounds like this. I wanted to do them so that I could cut them up for some journal cards, so that I could scan them and use them as pages in my journals, or actually as is. It makes them all a bit unique. I wasn't too fussed about worrying if I had the blocks. So this one you can see I didn't actually smudge my hands through, and I kind of liked it that you got that pattern of the squares of the ink pad. I also didn't really dry in between each of my pressings. So I wanted it all to run together. The way that I avoided making mud is I only use two colours. So I'm using an oxide ink, which is walnut stain, and I'm using a distress ink, which is a vintage photo. So there, I figured, I wasn't quite sure, but I figured they were pretty complementary. So it wouldn't make mud, but it would still oxidize in the air. And your distress inks, they're slightly see-through, so slightly transparent. So that means you can get a bit of layering with them if you want. And your oxide inks, they're less see-through, they sit on top of things quite nicely. So therefore, it just, as I said, it just helps with your layering, having one of each. So I could have even used the same colour. I just grabbed what was on my desk at the time. And as you can see, I'm sliding the paper through. You can also get quite a lot from one ink loading and spritzing. Oh, you'll notice I'm also wiping in between. That's just so that I don't mess up my ink pads when I'm reapplying my ink. So, not much to this technique, but you can play. As I said, if you dry your papers in between, you'll actually find that you'll get some lovely building of layers. Now that one I thought, I actually quite like that pattern, how that's worked. So I did put it aside. I let it dry a little bit more. And that meant when I came back in with that same page later, I did get a little bit of building up of that wonderful wishy-washy, watery effect. So even though you're using the same pressing, each piece ends up coming up differently. Now, after I'd done quite a few, so you'll see I just keep pressing the same pages back in. Because they're mostly wet, it's letting it all smudge through. I'm really aiming to colour the whole of the background on these. Quite often I want to build layers and the effects and lots of see-through, and so I get lots of levels. I might do, 4 or 5 passes and dry them in between so that I can really build up the layers and the levels. On this, I really did want the whole backgrounds coloured, just with a bit of movement. Because, as I said, the next step is I stamp on top of them. And I wanted to actually not see the stamps standing out too much, but I did want to see the stamping on the top. So I wanted to see the bit of texture. Now, I decided that I wanted to try a little bit of colour. I only did one colour. This is salvaged patina. I wet it down, and as you can see, I moved it around on the board. So I didn't want to lose the shapes too much, and I was very nervous with the first one. And when I pressed it in, I was thrilled at how it worked. So I'm doing it on the wet pages, and I just did it fairly subtly, but I really love how there's that subtle background of colour. Obviously, I could have gone to town and, really lifted this and really added a lot more. But to me, it was just enough to add some contrast. Remember, I'm not looking at, I'm not looking at high contrast in these because I'm looking at them as backgrounds. I wanted them to be pretty blendy. Now, I did cut up some of these and make them into tags. So in my next video, I'll just show you. I just did it with 2 of my pages and you can see exactly how that works out. So there, see that lovely one with the squares? And how, which is just the squares of the ink pad, and how just with a few layers building up, works out quite nicely. So look, then I was pretty happy. I dried them all off, and as I said, I wanted these to have a little bit of texture, but still be nicely blended and get a nice coverage in the background. So I used my blending brush, and I used it in the ink, not the oxide, and see the difference? The one on the right, I've actually blended over the top on the dry page just so that the whole page was covered because, as I said, I didn't want high contrast in these. The white is actually really lovely coming through and it can give you some high contrast. On these, I wanted it to be nice and sort of subtle. Now, I started stamping. Again, I limited my supplies. So all of this is about limiting your supplies, really trying to pull back. Quite often I'll play for hours. This one, I really wanted to just let the subtlety of the layers tell the story. So on the first one, just did ferns. On the next one, I did some ferns and then I added some little mini butterflies. And I switched between using my oxide walnut stain and my Distress Ink vintage photo. So when I wanted it a bit more subtle, I did the vintage photo. When I wanted a bit of a higher contrast, I used the oxide ink. So, and I played about. I turned the shapes. I had a big butterfly, a small butterfly, and a bee, a fern, and, a little post butterfly as well. So, look, 5 stamps all up. Oh, and a dragonfly, so 6 stamps all up. So even though I'm limiting my supplies, I still had quite a few to play with. So that was good. And I just kept twisting them around and turning them as I put them down. I made sure that some went off the edge of the paper, all different directions so that my backgrounds are non-directional, essentially. And I tried to, if I put a butterfly in one part of the page, I tried to put the same butterfly at least in 2 other sections of the page. So it's really just trying to get a nice spread across the whole page. Here I just did the little post butterfly that I had, post stamp, and pushed it around. Here's the bee, add a bit of a bee later. Isn't that a lovely stamp? I think that was Tracy Fox's actually. Some butterflies. So this last one I added, lots and lots of different ones to it. And I don't know, I think the stamping was actually almost the most fun part. I guess it's all fun. You know, it depends upon whether you're in the mood for mess today or you're not. But yeah, quite happy. As you can see, different subtleties. Some stamps stamped really nicely and others were nice and light. So they were all my little paper backgrounds. Pretty quick to put together. Not much drying in between. And this is them all dried up and ironed out. So you can see that there's lots of contrast and levels. So there'll be some lovely background pages and lovely backgrounds for little journal cards. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care, everyone. I'd love it if you could leave me a comment below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed what you saw today. And of course, please subscribe if you haven't already. I will see you next time. And in the meantime, keep creating. Enjoy!